and welcome to our webinar, Behind Closed Doors, How Communities Move Forward Towards Dismantling the Relationship Between Political Manipulation and Racism. I'm Mindy Romero, and I'm the director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy at the USC Price School of Public Policy. Today's webinar, as many of you know, is the final installment in a four-part series titled Behind Closed Doors. The series explored the entrenchment of racism in US politics and its impact on political power, both political power and representation in communities. It's a series that was, of course, hosted by the Center for Inclusive Democracy and the USC Price School, and very much in partnership with the California Black Freedom Fund, the Latino Community Foundation, and the AAPI Civic Engagement Fund. In addition to thanking our partners, partner organizations, I want to thank the individuals that worked with us very closely to create this as a true partnership. So Unsuk Lee, Christian Arana, Mark Philpart, and also James Woodson as well as of the California Black Power Network. So that is all the thank yous and acknowledgments that we want to make sure we've made. I want to also make sure everyone's aware that for those previous 3 webinars that we have had, those have all been recorded. In a little while, we'll put the names, the titles, the links to those in the chat, so you can have those. If you haven't already seen them, we really encourage you to share them as much as, view them yourself, and of course, share them as much as possible. Today's webinar will also be recorded, and when that's available, we'll spread that out and make sure we disseminate that link as widely as possible, but also encourage you to do so as well if you indeed find the webinar helpful. The idea, of course, is to encourage conversations beyond just today that lead to real change, challenging conversations, and we hope that that's what we've achieved thus far, and we will do so today as well. So let's go ahead and jump in, and we have an esteemed panel today. We're really excited about introducing. So we have, there we go, Lian Cheun, who's the executive director of Khmer Girls in Action. We have Peggy Moore, co-founder of Hope Action Change. And we have Councilmember Hernandez, who's of the LA City Council District 1. And I will say Councilmember Hernandez is not with us right now. She will be joining us about the halfway point in the webinar. And that's because there is an active City Council member meeting going on. So she's attending to business, of course. And and I should also acknowledge near the end of our discussion with our panel, we will have, of course, a Q&A, and we welcome all of you to include your questions there, and we will attempt to get to as many of them as we can as time allows. But because we only have an hour, we are going to go ahead and jump into our conversation. So this first question is for Lian. Hi, Lian. Welcome again. Thank you very much for joining us. And also the bios for all of our panelists will also be in the chat in just a moment. Because of time, we won't go through them over the webinar, but we welcome you to learn more about all of our panelists, their experiences, their commitments, their achievements on behalf of communities. So, Lian, you work primarily in Long Beach, but are in a coalition with people throughout LA and the region. Give us a sense of what kind of impact the release of the recording had in your spaces. What did you take away from the experience, and how are you moving forward?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the question, Mindy. Yes, so Khmer Girls in Action works in coalition with many organizational allies across LA County. And I think we all felt the shock and outrage when the recording came out. There were a lot of emotions. The impact of this felt compounded as well due to the overlapping crises that many of our communities are dealing with. Because BIPOC communities and a lot of folks, were all dealing with a lot of things that are happening in the community, including the effects of a global pandemic, police violence, political violence, and the rising authoritarianism, the climate emergency, a lot of the housing emergencies that's going on, with communities, not to mention the compounding trauma and mental health crises. And we're also dealing with unprecedented economic inequalities. So yes, the impact of the recording was both deeply and widely felt, I would say. quite a harmful setback within the current challenging terrain on which we are currently organizing. Right. So this kind of like unsavory side of positioning for power. I think for many of us, like we kind of understand that this isn't the first, nor would it be the last time. And it should not be taken away from the advancement of the very important work that people are doing on the ground. What I'm taking away from this is the importance of our movement to strengthen our both kind of like our organizational and regional infrastructure to help us build the culture of working collaboratively versus in silo or getting pitted against each other. Working intentionally on multiracial solidarity and power building efforts in our campaigns and initiatives, being able to, kind of support the capacity of the work to focus on collective agendas can really help us plan together, pivot together, and respond together. And I think this example for us have shown where some of those things could be possible. Another takeaway for me is that in our organizing and power building work, we need to contend for governing and co-governing power more strategically. There are already experimentations on the ground, but I do think that there will need to be a lot more discussions, support, and resources dedicated to this for the long term if we want to see, if we continue to want to push for that long-term systemic change on this front.
Thank you so much, Lian. And I think we should say, just in case there's a few of our viewers today that may not be absolutely certain what recording we're talking about, of course, the recording that was released, that was taken of city council members and others last fall, or released last fall, that had horrific racist remarks talking about redistricting. That recording was very much, if you will, an inspiration for this series. But of course, this series also expands beyond just one moment, as I think you just alluded to, right? It's really a case example of what we understand is the relationship, right, between racism, politics, political manipulation. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of the connection there with the recording and what we're talking about. Thank you. All right, Peggy, you have a long track record of working in political spaces across the state. How do you see the recording impacting the political establishment in Los Angeles, but also, of course, feel free to take that beyond Los Angeles as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you. It's definitely an honor and pleasure to be here and to be able to have this conversation. Not like this is the first time we've had these kind of conversations in our community and the work that we do, but it seems like we need to amp it up even more. I just think it's the political landscape it's going to be hard for folks, not only in Los Angeles. I mean, think about the electeds. What does that mean? I bet people are going to be checking to see if people have recorders on when they come into their meetings from now on, for sure. But what it means is like people have to be more aware and more authentic and be more truthful in terms of their work and their leadership. The establishment is hit hard, not just in Los Angeles, but across California and across the country. People are going to be paying more attention to their deliverables, I believe. I think it's actually a really great opportunity for folks to really begin to deliver on the work and serve the communities in which they represent. I think that as leaders in the community, we're going to have an opportunity to be able to really task our leaders a lot more and really kind of be in more coalition with each other so that way we can actually get more to the heart of who they are. One of the things that I've noticed as an impact, I was talking to a really good friend of mine who's a council member, Heather Hutt. She talked about one of the impacts that most people don't realize. You know, her name was mentioned in the recording over and over again. And one of the things that she is dealing with is, as a council member, her integrity. Like she didn't make the recording, but her name was all through the recording. So then the community is questioning her integrity based on other people's assumptions. And so the folks are calling her and saying, do you have my back? Can I count on you? Do you really, support us? And that's been a very difficult thing for her to deal with. Because those calls come in every day and you have to keep she has to keep, establishing herself, even though she's been doing coalition work for a long time, even though she's been a great leader for many, many decades, even though she was born before, voters' rights and all this good stuff, she still is feeling like she's starting all over again when she's been doing this work all the time. And I think there are probably many other leaders that might feel that way. So I think the establishment is shook. I think we as a community are shook big time. And I think there needs to be just a lot more. We say transparency, but what does that really mean? Right. And I think the hard part is that, these are the folks that represent the community. You are my leader. You are my point of reference. You make decisions on my life and how I live and how decisions are made. And if you can't see me or if you judge me that way, then really how are you making decisions is really going to benefit me for the long run. So it's good. It's hard hit across the board. And even for leaders, whether you're political or not, we're hard hit.
Thank you very much. And then if people do, or if they are more careful with those recordings or being concerned about what might be secretly recorded, like you said, there's a distinction between being careful because something's being recorded and actually being authentic and real and honest and transparent, right? Yeah. All right. So, Lian, back to you. Given your organizing with Southeast Asian youth and young women, how are you making sense of the recording with young people? What has their reaction been?
Yeah, so KJ works with high school age and transitional age youth. We have a leadership development pathway with corresponding curriculum to support young people's critical thinking and analysis of race, class, and gender issues in the community based on their developmental stages. So to us, it is vital. It is a vital part of our work to expand the pool of socially conscious and politically active young people in our community. Like with many current events and issues impacting our community, it's really important to hold space to actively listen to young people, allow for any and all the frustration, anger, confusion, questions, curiosity, and basically any other inquiries that might emerge in a youth space. We often do small group breakouts with guided questions to help young people process. And that's super important to create that type of space where young people could talk to each other about, what's going on, what are they hearing in the media and the news. There's a lot of like mainstream stuff that they're hearing, but then they're also wanting to know like what's the real deal, and then in addition, it's in a lot of our curriculum, what we often do is we often include examples of similar issues that have happened in various community and how people fought back, which we find to be a really important process of the consciousness building, and also to ensure that young people feel like they could take action and that they could be a part of solving the problem or creating change in the community. So when we do provide concrete example, it also really helps us to ground our next step with young people. And because in a lot of our work, our young people help shape kind of the next step, but they also help shape the narrative and the stories that we want to tell. So for this example, like we oftentimes want to tell the story about like what it means to be in solidarity with other communities of color, with communities that are impacted, by the recording, and then also, it could be, a range of other issues. So we often end our sessions with take action steps that the young people either help to shape, or we provide take action steps from allies and organizations that may be requesting support from us. So it's also really important that we train and teach young people to receive direction from other communities that might be needing support, who might be facing kind of like just the immediate on the ground implication of what have happened. And so So this work around consciousness building, the cultural and political education is very important because it helps our young people not only understand the context of the issue, but also provides an avenue to both articulate their own story, make various connection, but also see like what are the similarities or the differences that might be going on between our communities and other communities, and then how could I play a role in supporting, in creating and figuring out like a solution-oriented ways of supporting folks. And then finally, I would just say that we always create some space for breath work, mind, body, and other somatic work, art, music, or journaling. And this is a part of our commitment to build in healing elements to the work, because there's so many bad news out there. And I feel like, the last several years and the past administration have just really created and have put a lot of our communities in crisis mode, and have really overstretched our capacity to respond and to support our communities in general. And so it is our hope, in building in some of these healing elements as part of our political consciousness with our young people, is the hope that our youth, for our youth to both understand and embrace that fighting for justice can be healing, and that we could maximize our collective forces and take good care of ourselves as well as each other.
Thank you. Fighting for justice can be healing. I love that. Thank you very much. Peggy, how do you make sense of elected officials of color who have progressive track records, making racist and anti-Indigenous comments while also contesting Black power? I'm going to throw that question at you.
This is a trick question, because you really can't make sense of this, and nor should we.
Please.
Okay. We should not make sense of this. It really doesn't speak true to, it doesn't speak true to what great work is happening in the community. Like Lian just talked about healing and how important that is to the space. And I believe there's so many organizations that are out there that are really doing the work in a way that uplifts us all as a whole community. So I don't want to make sense to this. This is unacceptable. This makes no sense, is the reality. But yet it is something that is part of our reality because we've heard the recording, right? We've seen people's true colors. But that doesn't mean we have to make sense of it. It means that we have to have a different accountability. It means that we have to really hold them to task. It means that we have to begin to come together even differently as a community in coalition with each other, and not just leave it up to them because they are in the role or carry the title of being an elected or a council member. That's one type of a leader. But there are so many other leaders out there that are really doing the work, and we need to lift that up a lot more. But I don't want to make sense of this, and I don't want our community to make sense of this. I want us to hold accountability, and I want us to begin to shift the leadership. We can actually bring leaders into this space that, hold all of this really authentically and genuinely. So I was like, is this a trick question that you're asking me? Because this is not what we want. It's not who we are. And we don't have to accept this behavior. And we have to just really lift up all the goodness that we really do have going on. So I'm not making sense of this at all.
Thank you. And the question, of course, wasn't at all suggesting that you should make sense of it.
I wasn't sure that I'm kidding, though. No, I understand.
No. Yes,
but we try to make sense. We try to make sense because we want to justify. We want to try to figure it out. We want to figure out what do we do with this now that it's in front of us, right? So I understand that, and I think even with that,
also, I'm sure. Tell me if you agree, but if others try to make sense of it, and as you just said, countering that, pushing back, holding accountability, right? Mm-hmm. For news media, others that try to justify, try to explain, try to rationalize, diminish. Right.
And I think that's where it goes off, right? Because we try to justify, we try to make it okay in some kind of way. We try to make it a part of the norm, or acceptable. And we just no longer have to do that. because like there's so much other good stuff happening out there that we should lift up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't make sense of it. We push back. All right. So I'm going to continue with you as a follow-up here, Peggy. How can the political establishment work towards repairing their relationships with communities that were harmed in the recording?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. I think there's so many different ways in which we can come together. I learned that there's this dinner conversation is being had called Embrace. And Embrace is bringing together in Los Angeles, I think also up under Councilmember Hutt, that is bringing a very diverse population of Los Angeles folks together, as well as intergenerational. And they're sitting at the table and they're having conversation and they're having courageous conversations. And this begins the process of healing. And the goal is like you have more of these conversations throughout the city. And I think in Los Angeles also has a department called the Civic and Human Rights and Equity Department, which are actually leading these conversations, which I think is really powerful as well, because it's coming from the department there. And I think the more we have these conversations, the more we see each other, the more we break bread with each other, the more that see that we're more alike, we have more in common than not. And being led by our electeds, I believe that becomes an opportunity for the healing space. Is how do you bring people together? So it's embracing, and they do a dinner and they have about 30 people in the room. So it's really kind of intimate. It's not like a big old crowd. It's just like, who are you? And you realize that we have children together, and you realize you have all these different things that really celebrate us more. So I really love that. And I also love the department. So I see the work that they're doing. And every council member should do it. You know, it shouldn't just be one person. It should be something that is contagious across the whole city.
Contagious. I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lian, what lessons should we learn, or us who are building power in communities that were named in the recording?
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to agree with the things that Peggy have just said. Sometimes a lot of these things just does not make sense. And kind of like, moving forward, because I work so much with young people, and even for them, it's hard, to kind of make sense sometimes out of all the various things and issues that's happening in our community. But I would say that, I alluded to this earlier, that, this is not the first time, nor would it be the last time that communities are going to experience this level of racism and political manipulation. And so, I mean, let's just be real about it and not get it twisted that, when, it's going to happen again. And so to me, in fact, right, history have proven that to be the case. So to me, the most important thing for us really is to lean into, for someone who's been doing a lot of, have been engaged in power building work for a while now. For me, like the key takeaway is for us to really lean into that, and kind of really throw down on the power building work, kind of like what it has done historically, for communities of color when we build power and when we're able to fight back, the advances that folks have been able to make, all the lessons from our ancestors, and just really being able to lean into that, because the power building work have really strengthened our abilities over time to hold politicians accountable and to hold the political system accountable, despite, how overwhelmingly difficult oftentimes that has been. The important lesson to me here, right, is to be able to both leverage the political moment to demand better services and programs for our community, as well as to amend for the community, while not allowing it to distract from other important work that many groups are moving on the ground with their constituency. And I think it's really important, in some way to continue to demand the repairing of harm that has been done to communities. And so I think that's something that we could all back and we should still continue to push for. The other key takeaway for me that is, really worth reiterating is the power of being able to maintain and sustain our multiracial solidarity work together. It's, many of our community have gone through a lot of difficult times, and particularly in the, Black community have been dealt with have been disproportionately impacted by so many issues that's going on in LA and other parts of our country. But this piece around multiracial solidarity, coalition and alliances that we have built, particularly, folks have built that over time. And there's, and I really see like just how strong and the strength of that. Because, when stuff went down and just even thinking about all the various political flashpoints that have happened since the pandemic, with George Floyd, with some of the, the anti-Asian hate and with the, various, I just felt like there's been so many political flashpoints. It's like you could go down the list. But with all that being said, many of us have leaned towards each other for help and support because it felt like every single community was dealing with all the stuff that is also happening. And then we're also, we're dealing with internal stuff, but we're also dealing with the external harm that's coming, that felt like it was constantly coming down on the community. So to me, like that is so important. Because either it be making phone calls for each other, sending letters of support, and or showing up for each other, being out there, being at the rallies, being loud, being together. That piece of the solidarity and the multiracial justice work is super important because then we're showing that we're in this together, and we're also modeling what that could look like, not just for each other, but for future generations that's coming up, and really also soaking up all the current political stuff that's happening. And then to me, when you're already in like a multiracial coalition space, there's already an existing space that we could leverage for healing and connection, which I find to be really, really important and to not lose sight of. So when folks were able to call me about certain things, or when I'm able to call like some of the different organizations in the coalition that we're part of, and the first thing we ask is, are you okay? And what can we do to support? And just sometimes just saying that to each other makes such a huge difference in like the feeling of like just holding so much of the burden when things go down in the community. And so, so to me, like those are all just really important things. I think, like, just some lessons and the importance of leaning on each other and showing up for each other, and don't let too much of, some of the noise be the distraction of advancing the important work.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do a check-in to see if the council member has joined us yet.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Hernandez. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. I had a feeling you were there. That's great. I really appreciate you coming a few minutes early. So we're going to go ahead and transition into the second half of our panel, of our conversation today. And we already noted, Councilmember, that we put everybody's bios in the chat for all of our viewers. So everybody hopefully has checked that out and has learned more about you and what you're doing in Council District Number 1. So I'm going to jump in because the first question is of the second half is for you. And again, thank you for joining us. So what is your reaction, Councilmember, to the recording? And of course, we're talking about the recording that was released last fall. How has the recording, as you see it, impacted the public's engagement with the council in the short run? What about the long run?
Thank you, Mindy, for that question. And thank you so much for having me. And Lian, Peggy, grateful to be in your presence today. I think the recordings agitated community in a way that re-engaged community towards City Hall. It also brought coalitions and communities together. as we saw through the solidarity created by the Oaxacan community and the different protests that occur and that continue to this day. I think, and that's what happened in the short term, is a lot of activation, a lot of engagement, a lot of anger, obviously. And, in the long term is that there are elections that are coming up next year. There are many elections that will be coming after that. And so it's a point for really people to engage. That's what I hope for the long term, is that engagement stays through the election and through implementation, because we need it.
Thank you. And you said implementation. Would you mind elaborating a little bit on that, by what you meant?
Yes, the policies and campaigns that people are trying to move forward. It's not only about getting elected and putting motions together, but it's actually implementing the work within the motions. And so I come from helping develop policy, but something that I'm really proud of is the work to implement those policies, or the policy changes, or the campaigns, or the budget reallocations, helping create the programs. That's what I mean by implementation, is a follow through. Because it's more than just a motion, and that's really what we need, is a commitment and follow through, and people willing to do that labor, because that's the unseen work. That's the work that oftentimes is the hardest, but it's the most crucial to making sure that our vision actually progresses forward.
Thank you. So what is the City Council doing to ensure this kind of behind closed doors political manipulation never happens again? And I'm talking about, of course, I know that the council is a political body, and you can't fully speak for, in detail towards the hearts and minds of your council members. But we ask as much as you can to talk about kind of what actually realistically you think the council is able to do and is committed to do in terms of, ensuring this doesn't happen again.
Things that we're doing to make sure that, these kind of things don't happen again. It's not, I don't speak for the council, but I speak for myself and others, a few others who are really trying to push for accessibility of our government. So language justice, doing work around making sure that all our departments, that the city council itself has all the materials dispersed in appropriate languages, in many languages that exist for LA, that the translation is there, that we try to hold city meetings outside of the regular business hours so that people can attend. And I think there are people who have those values ingrained from the top to the bottom, and that lens in all of the work they do. And by people, I mean other council members. But I do think it's something we should elevate at a higher level, because that's really what keeps people from not understanding what goes on in city council. And so you have community telling you, I saw that this happened. Why did y'all do this? When in fact, that is not what actually occurred in City Hall. So there's also not a very clear understanding. So one thing I do personally is also have City Hall 101 videos that I post every week or every other week to educate community on how to do public comment, how to submit that, how to look up motions that have passed. And so that's just one piece, accessibility, right? So they can truly hold us accountable, which we invite, which we've been asking community for. And it's also to remember what happened, so that, decisions that were made prior to the tapes coming out, that those situations do not occur again. That it is not just business as usual, creating and passing motions that are disproportionately harmful to Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income community members, because that happened for so long. And so making sure that we remember this is what happened in these tapes. This is how it impacted, Councilmember Nithya Raman's district. This is how it impacts CD1. It wasn't just conversations, but these are real life implications. And so I think it also was it's a thing we have to remember, so that we can be set free in the way that we can talk about policy and who's disproportionately impacted, and remembering that it's many times when it's systemic harms, it's Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income communities that are experiencing the blunt force of that.
Thank you. So the next question I'm going to send over to Lian. Lian, based on where we are, so, with a set of community demands that haven't been met around KDL, Kevin De Leon's resistance to stepping down, new candidates, as has already been noted earlier in our conversation, new candidates running to fill vacated seats, et cetera. How do we continue to build power and support those on the front lines, given where we're at?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that question. I think one of the most important things that we could do to continue to build power and support those on the front lines is really, listen deeply to what folks on the front lines are saying in terms of like what they need and kind of like the support that they need, the demands that are on the table, and are there ways for us to collectively to support in leveraging some of those demands, and also in mobilizing and mobilizing resources to those in the front line, because like I said earlier, a lot of the community organization and folks who are disproportionately impacted by systemic inequalities, many of our communities are already really stretched and already overwhelmed. And so to me, to support their power building, for them to fight back, we need to think about how we mobilize resources to a lot of these frontline communities to continue to empower them and to continue to advance the work forward. And I think it's also really crucial. And I want to thank the council member for mentioning language access and being able to, put out videos to tell people and explain to people how City Hall works, because it is really difficult and hard for me, I already have a hard time fully understanding things that goes down on City Hall. But I think it's especially hard if you're speaking another language, if you're a young person, if you're someone, who's just trying to, access City Hall. So I think, oftentimes like being able to support frontline communities in helping to leverage access to City Hall and to assert and to help them strengthen, different access point, because this is where I think, oftentimes we may need some support in that building up of a co-governing relationship with communities of color that could help, advance some of the power building that we're doing in our community, but then also to really have like an important inside-outside strategy and relationship building with our elected official, that could both help us understand what's going on the inside, so that the proper political education and that kind of stuff could happen on the external side as well, because people need to be educated, in terms of like some of the stuff in City Hall. But I would also say like it would be really great as well to think about where are some of those bureaucratic red tapes that we could get rid of that have been put in place to systemically disenfranchise folks to accessing City Hall, and to understand how things work and how things operate. And so I think those are some of the areas as well that will really help frontline community as folks continue to build power. And I think there's a lot of complicated stuff as well, like just making sure that ensuring that some of the language access piece are across the board, right, in all elements of government, and just really looking at that as like, a lot of folks in the Indigenous community have talk about it as language justice, and how that is such a way of completely like disengaging folks, and how important that is. And often, sometimes even when we do speak English, so as an example, I speak English and I still sometimes have a really hard time understanding the processes of City Hall. So needless to say, folks who may need a second language. But anyway, those are just some thoughts that I thought that I think would be really helpful. But then at the end of the day, though, I think like for those of us who may have the resources or who may have the network, to really think about how we could mobilize additional support to help those on the front line so that they could continue moving this work forward.
Thank you, Lian, very much. So Peggy, how do you envision we move forward based on where we are now?
First of all, thank you, Councilmember. I just appreciate your leadership greatly. I think what's coming up for me right now as I was thinking, what do I envision, is I feel like we have really some good stuff going on. And I think that we can actually, if we can lift up, do some follow through, like the Councilmember said, create real deliverables for our community. That's what I envision that we do. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so much good stuff. There's so many great communities that are coming together. There's so much coalition building. There's so much love. There's so many spaces where we do see each other and know each other and love each other and advocate for each other and make space for each other. So how do we lift up what we already have going on and move that forward, as opposed to trying to create something new? Because we don't have to. Like we talked about before, Lian mentioned before, we've been here. It's going to happen again. So every time we come up to something, we have to start over again. We don't have to do that. So I envision that we really just continue to support the things that are already there, that already are moving forward, that are already good for our community. Give those spaces a little extra breath, give those spaces a little extra love and support. So that way we can actually have more deliverables for our community. Because at the end of the day, it is about how do we provide the services? How do we take care of our community? How is our community getting the services that they need? That's what we're looking for. And so I just feel like we don't have to reinvent anything. I think we have a lot of great stuff, a lot of good things that are going on. I just want us to make sure that I envision that we keep pushing those things forward and lift up the good, right? Lift it up, because there is a lot of good out there, and not get stuck in this one narrative of folks on the recording and how they feel, because those are just a handful of people. And yes, they have a lot of power. There's a lot of people power out there as well that we can tap into. So that's what I envision. Let's do what we do and keep doing what we do well.
Thank you. So last question, but before we jump into that, I just want to remind everybody, all of our viewers today, that we're going to have the Q&A in just a little bit. We welcome any and all of your questions. We're doing really well on time, so please don't be shy if you have a question for the panel. Okay, so I said lightning round, maybe a minute or so, but actually, since we're doing well on time, please take this in whatever direction all three of you would like to take it in. So Councilmember Hernandez, Peggy, and Lian, what gives you, and we'll go in that order, what gives you hope for the future of politics in LA? And again, feel free to expand that beyond if you want. But Councilmember Hernandez, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? At this moment, it's a couple of things. It's one, my team. That we've built here to represent CD1, because I couldn't do it without them. And they just do such phenomenal work every single day that it reminds me, we got to keep it pushing, and it drives me. But another thing that gives me hope is when we're at community events. For example, we had a tenant workshop and resource fair where we had, dozens and dozens of elders come through, and they got free food, but they also got tenant right education so that they know their rights. Because we were in the MacArthur Park Pico Union area where it's densely populated, mostly apartments. So we wanted to make sure people know the changes coming up. And to see folks coming in to get that education, to get that food, and we bought a ton of city departments that they connected with, that really recharged my batteries, because something that I want to make sure we are is, as a council office, is a conduit to resources, a conduit to care, a conduit to political education and education on how to engage government. And so those are the things that give me hope for the most part. And I will say, it's a very challenging place to be in. It's a lot of responsibility, but a lot of, navigating that you have to do. And so it's the community, it's my team that give me hope every day.
Thank you very much, Peggy. What gives you hope?
Well, what gives me hope is, I'm a co-founder of Hope Action Change. And so we believe in bringing the hope to create the action to then make the change. And so what really gives me hope is the opportunities that we have. My wife and I, and her name is Hope. So, I'm just surrounded, right? But what gives me hope is the opportunities that we have to engage with different organizations to really have courageous conversations And we actually work a lot with leadership and leadership development. And really a lot of folks in that middle management area, they're not really always quite sure how to do what they do and what that looks like and how to lead. And so when we're in those spaces and we're training with folks, just to having those aha moments, those moments of learning and seeing their leadership just, blossom, but also the intergenerational work that we have the opportunity to be engaged with. When we see the whole family learning together and the neighbors learning together, that gives me hope for the future. It helps me to believe and know that our history will continue, our stories will be told, and then we have our legacies will still be there, and we have a whole new generation of folks that we're just holding so we can help them to bring out their highest good. And they also inspire those folks like me, who I'm really kind of an OG, but all of that yumminess is what gives me hope. Yeah.
I love the words you're using today, yumminess. That is a good word to go along with a question of hope, around hope. Lian, what gives you hope?
For sure. Yeah. For me, it's the young people. So shout out to all the youth in LA and across LA County. And given my experience working with many of them, I just want to say that, young people know so much more than what mainstream society gives them credit for. And I think we just have such an amazing generation of young people coming up and stepping into this work. And I'm super hopeful around that. And for a lot of the young people who are active and involved with their curiosity, their dedication and commitment, and just being a part of building a more just world together, like that just gives me so much hope. And as someone who also kind of like grew up in the youth organizing world, that really helped to shape my whole trajectory of what I wanted to do, in the movement. And it really helped me understand and shape my consciousness of the world. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about how to continue to cultivate that level of leadership in our young people, so that as we age out of the work, we have a whole bunch of young people who can't wait to get into the work. And that to me is I feel hopeful when I think about that level of kind of like leadership, engagement, and transition into the work. So for sure, young people.
Thank you all very much. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and transition into our Q&A. And again, for our viewers, please feel free to put questions into the chat. Let's start here. So we've got several long questions. So just for time and for the benefit of our other viewers, we're going to just consolidate these a little bit. So first, and this is for Councilmember Hernandez, question is, I am a Latina person. I'm going to read this as close to verbatim as I can, unless I need to edit because of time or possible confusion with the length of the question. I'm a Latina person, and I think a lot of my family and Latinx peers do not identify as white people or people in positions of power because they identify as a minority. It is my opinion that this contributes to the racism, like we heard in the recording. Councilmember, what role do we have to educate our Latinx community that we can also be part of the problem? Is I think the question here, that we can also be part of the problem. Where would you like to go with that, Councilmember?
I think it's a great question. I think where I would suggest people to go it is an organization called Mi Gente. Mi Gente is my political home, and the organization is a membership organization that provides political education, racial justice education for predominantly Spanish-speaking communities. And so the language is very tailored for people to understand it in Spanish. And I think, we have to ask ourselves these questions. We have to assess, how we can be better allies and make sure that we support all of our communities, particularly our communities that are most disproportionately impacted, for example, by incarceration and homelessness, which we do make up a significant portion of the population, but it's a Black community that is heavily, heavily disproportionately impacted. And so I think even in policy development, in all of our work, we have to uplift that. And for educational purposes and materials, I would tell people to go to Mi Gente for some of that content. It's been very helpful for me and very helpful for me educating my loved ones. And La Defensa is also putting out information that could be helpful.
Thank you very much. Next question. And of course, when you have a sitting council member on a panel, that city council member is going to get the majority of the questions. So thank you, council member, for fielding all of these. So the next question, again, just trying to stay true to the way that it's worded as much as possible. The question is, the ongoing exide catastrophe of 7 million pounds of lead that has been released into brown and Black communities is not being addressed appropriately. The backlash of the leak has polarized on all hands on deck response to the catastrophe at all levels of government. How can we come together to demand a long-term health and education plan for the victims and their families? And then how do we move the communities and elected officials that represent the impacted communities that are not given a seat at the table to address the urgent crisis?
Great. Is that for me or for the table?
That's for that was directed towards you. My apologies if I didn't make that clear.
Okay,
yes.
No, you're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, my background is being an organizer, is building coalitions. Part of the work that I've done is, help lead the Justice LA Coalition to stop LA County's $3.5 billion jail plan. They wanted to build 2 new jails, one in the desert for women and one in downtown for people with mental health needs. And it took 10 years to stop that jail construction plan. So obviously a lot of these things are marathons. I'm not an expert in what has happened in Exide, but I'm familiar with it. And I think as suggestion as an organizer, I think is folks, and I mean, now I'm inside, right, obviously, but as an experienced organizer and seeing the power of the people, I think there has to be continued pressure by community to make it happen. But not only that, you as an organizer also have to create the political landscape for your priority to be a priority, right? One of the things that we did in order to make sure that the jail fight was a priority was that we worked with the news and media and editorial boards to create a political moment, right? Because a political moment didn't exist, so we had to create one. And so I would just say, build up your coalitions, build up your organizations, build up communities so that you can put pressure and also do the work of creating your political moment for your priority. Because right now, what's overtaking the landscape is the homelessness issue, is the possible evictions with rent. Oftentimes, the environmental issues are getting not as much priority. So, I would say create your own political moment by engaging and creating your own political landscape.
Thank you very much. We have a new question, and this I think anyone could answer, but I'll throw it directly, I think, to Lian and Peggy. It is, the voter turnout in Council District 6 is low. How can I help increase the number of voter turnout? I think they mean the number of people voting and the overall voter turnout rate. What can I do to help? I am a resident and voter of Council District 6. And I assume any of your answers might also let us know if they extend beyond just Council District 6, if you want to address just low turnout period. Peggy, Lian?
Yeah, I could answer this question. So I think it's always wonderful when someone wants to help increase the number of voter turnout, because we work so hard during electoral season. We need as much volunteers as possible to support with phone banking and door knocking, talking to residents, talking to voters. And I think that is such a huge part of the work, talking to your friends and families, and kind of being a part of supporting that. And so and it's not just during election cycle where you could help support the education of residents and voters in your community. Oftentimes during off election year is such a great opportunity to mobilize and educate folks in our community about the issues that may be coming up, in the following election cycle, or the campaign and issues that the community is working on, because that is such a good way to first get, a face-to-face conversation with potential voters. And then also it really helped counter a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that normally happen during electoral season, because voters would have already heard from the community and maybe have already gotten a few touches. And those are just such important part of the overall voter turnout in our community. And of course, we want to, as much as possible, figure out the easiest way for voters to engage in the voting process. So whatever we could do to decrease any barriers to voting would be really, really, really great. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is legislation going through the state right now, or there's legislation going through the state process right now around back end voter registration that would create automatic voter registration. And I think that's also a really important legislation to support.
And I would just echo one major piece is that, don't wait till election season, like do it early, start engaging with your community early. And also, find out what they're interested in, bring them into the conversation, as a council member talking about, a lot of folks don't even know what's really going on in government and let alone how it's impacting them. So how do we really, start bringing our communities in a little bit more? How do we begin to educate them? So voter education is huge, but I think it happens way before the election cycle. Because you want to build trust, right? And when you educate somebody and you get their buy-in, then they become someone who spreads the good news, right? So, early and often.
Thank you both. Councilmember, did you want to tackle this question too? If not, no worries.
I mean, I if you can, knock on doors, meet people where they're at. So knock on doors, remind people voting centers open 10 days before the election. Some open 7 days before the election. So just keep reminding people. Sometimes people don't even know that there's an election. So, you can plug into whatever campaign you want and door knock. And I think for me, that has been the best way, is to door knock and to meet people on social media, because you're meeting them where they're at, which is at the door or in their hand on their phone. But I can't stress enough how much it means to actually go to someone's door and engage them in voting. It definitely makes changes.
Thank you very much. And I'll just note, of course, we are the Center for Inclusive Democracy, and we're a research center, nonpartisan academic research center. And we produced a lot of research around the state of voter turnout in communities across California and also nationally. And we have a number of tools, and I just put in the chat one tool, which is the LA County voter turnout tool. And that specific tool tracks up, just as the council member just mentioned, of course, LA County is a Voters' Choice Act county. It has vote centers that are open up to 11 days before an election. And this tool tracks in almost real time turnout throughout the early voting period. And on election day, every hour on election day is a great partnership, a data partnership with the county elections office. We independently produce this, but you can use this tool now even to look at the turnout that happened in the general election and layer dozens of different demographic characteristics and understand the communities that have lower turnout versus higher turnout, what their demographics are: Latino, Asian American, young, youth, poverty, vehicle access, disability, language proficiency, and hopefully use the tool for outreach during elections, but also after the fact for all of that strategy in doing nonpartisan engagement. And Councilmember, were you going to say something? Oh, so I just wanted to give a shout out to that tool. We have just a minute left for maybe the last question I'll tackle here, for just if one of you wants to take a stab at it. What do the organizers on the panel need from people in the community who are not engaged yet? How can the average person get involved in making change? I'm going to take that for a minute, Peggy or Lian.
Okay, so I could tackle this one. So I think, as much as possible, for those in the community who are not yet engaged and you're interested in engaging, please reach out to the local community organization that is in your neighborhood and in your community areas, because sometimes folks have limited capacity, but then also there are also a lot of events and engagement opportunity from those organizations as well. I would also look into potentially signing up for folks' newsletter, showing up to some of the events, or just simply calling the organization and ask them how you could be involved in part of the campaign or initiative that they're currently working on. And it's a lot easier for folks to get involved than they think. And I think a lot of, especially the base building organization, we're constantly looking to increase our membership base and to build our membership base. And we're more than excited when folks come to us before we get to them around engaging in the work. And so if you want to be engaged and, other folks who really want to find different avenues and different engagement points, please feel free to reach out to any of the community organization in your neighborhood locally.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And I should note too, the LA County voter turnout tool that I put in the chat was also funded by the California Community Foundation. We're very grateful for their partnership and support. But most importantly, I want to thank everyone who participated in our webinar today. Of course, Lian and Peggy and Councilmember Hernandez, particularly for your very busy schedule and making this work and joining us halfway through. We greatly appreciate your flexibility. I want to thank everyone that participated in all 4 of our webinars in the full series. And of course, our partners, the AAPI Civic Engagement Fund, the Latino Community Foundation, and the California Black Freedom Fund. We hope that, again, all of the recordings, the ones that have already been released, and today's webinar, when the recording is released for that you share it as widely as possible. The idea here was, and we know there are lots of really important, powerful conversations that have been happening specific to the recording in LA and beyond, but we wanted to contribute in our way, a challenging space here, honest conversation, and a series of discussions that could be shared, as all of you may see that they are helpful if you do indeed feel that way. So thank you to everyone. And of course, thanks to my home partners of USC Price School that have helped make this possible. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.